Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about migration from Cherwell to Jira Service Management. Eric, is my audio sounding okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sound great.
All right. Before we launch, a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording today's session. So if you'd like to rewatch or share with people on your team, we will be sending out the link within the next few days after we have the video uploaded. So we invite you to rewatch and share as you like. We will be taking questions. If you want to start questions in the chat feature, we'll be happy to launch those at the end of the presentation. If I see questions on a specific slide, I'll try to interrupt Eric as we go as well. All right, Eric, if you want to start the slideshow, we'll kick off with a really quick introduction about StrataCom, who we are, in case you are unfamiliar. So StrataCom has been doing IT service management since 1997. We've worked with a lot of the big vendors in the ITSM space over the years. For the past decade, our focus has been on Share, but as we all know, there's not a path forward with Share since the product won't be continued and enhanced any further. About a year and a half ago, as a company, we tried to figure out what our next 10 years might look like ahead. We evaluated Avanti's migration. We have a couple customers headed that way, but what we found is a lot of our Cherwell customer base began looking for alternative solutions and going out into the marketplace to shop and talking to Forrester and Gartner about what solutions they recommend. And when we went out shopping in the same method, we really liked what we saw in Jira Service Management by Atlassian. We were very excited about their roadmap, what they had on their development roadmap for the next 5 years ahead. There was a very large customer base, so we always feel like there's safety in numbers. We were excited about how robust the solution was and how comparable it was to Cherwell for workflow, ease of configurability, pricing, a lot of great advantages. So we're excited to share with you today a tool that we built that will migrate all of your information and data from Cherwell to Jira Service Management. Since so many of our customers are now making that migration, we built this toolkit that we use for migration efforts to save time and money for everybody. So we're excited to share that with you today. Would you go to the next slide, Eric? All right, just a little bit. So we'll give you the company background, reasons why people choose us, that proven methodology. We've been doing ITSM migrations and implementations for 10 years. 25 years. We have a lot of expertise. We've done it a lot of times. We've got tried and true methodology, reliability, fair price. I'm seeing a lot of people on the phone here are already familiar with StrataCom, so we won't spend too much time on this slide. But before we dive into the content, I wanted to introduce one of our partners, Raj Schmidt, who is an ITSM advocate for Atlassian. He's going to talk a little bit about Atlassian in case you're unfamiliar with the company, to get you a little bit more familiar before we dive in. And Rod actually comes from the Cherwell world as well. He was a sales rep in the Midwest region for a long time. So a lot of you on the call may already be familiar with Rod. So when you're ready, Rod, go ahead and share your screen and let's give everyone a little bit of overview about Atlassian.
Will do. Thank you, Laura. Can you hear me okay?
Can.
And the slides are up, huh?
Yes, looking good.
Got it working finally. I always have trouble with my Mac and getting things to work in Teams, but it's working. Again, I'm Rod Schmidt. I'm the ITSM EA at supporting the Jira Service Management tool. Your development teams may be using Jira, which we're probably best known for, a very strong project management tool, issue tracking. We also have Confluence, which is amongst the best knowledge management platform in the market, but we'll focus today on Jira Service Management. Just a quick overview. I actually worked for Cherwell for 6+ years. Great company, great product, great user community. Then Avanti came along. Don't know how else to say it. And a number of us left Cherwell and came over to Atlassian because the customer focus over here. I don't want to quote it directly. You can look up core values Atlassian and see what they say about the customer and what it means to them. A very customer-focused company. When I worked for Cherwell, also StrataCom was my go-to partner. My most successful implementations of Cherwell were done by StrataCom. Just to back up what Laura had said earlier there. I can't get to go forward now, Laura. Wouldn't you know it? There it goes. Okay. So why is Jira Service Management the fastest growing ITSM platform? I'm not going to give you a total sales pitch here, but just give you some basics before Eric jumps into some of the things he's going to talk about. We're a very modern, up-to-date UI, and I'm sure you've either seen that or will see that as you look at the product built on the Jira platform. The connectivity into Jira and Confluence for your knowledge base or platform is a no-brainer. To have one product, one platform across dev team, the operations team, knowledge is just a great benefit. Our total cost of ownership, the lowest in the market. And then I always get asked that. I just got asked that last week by a CIO. I don't want the cheapest product. I want a product that does. You'll get the lowest TCO without losing any functionality in the JSM tool. I don't care if you're looking at ServiceNow, BMC, the Avanti tool set. We compete very well and replace all those on a daily basis. Our license costs are the lowest in the market. Just had a site that replaced ServiceNow. We wound up being 20% the cost of ServiceNow. You also get the virtual agent included, our AI-powered virtual agent. I had an in-depth demo of that last week with a customer. They were blown away by that. No additional cost. We have the Ops Genie product, which is an on-call management platform included in the product at no additional charge. So you can see that Atlassian is a pretty customer-based organization. So you'll see a very low TCO. We only license for people who actually manage tickets or fulfill tickets. Approvers, no license needed. Anyone coming in through the portal, no license required for that. I talked earlier about aligning DevOps and the service desk teams. That's just a no-brainer. You also get in our product ESM. You get HR, facilities, asset management, customer service, all included beyond just the products I had mentioned earlier. And it's also a no-code, low-code solution, much like the Cherwell product. Just to back me up, here's some comments from one of our great customers, Finish Line, who replaced ServiceNow with the JSM tool and just backs me up on the same thing as I already said here earlier. We've got a site, American Equity in Des Moines, Iowa, replaced the Cherwell product with JSM because, again, of the connectivity into Jira and in the Confluence tool. Hy-Vee, big user of JSM, 1,500 licenses. Dell, even though they're a ServiceNow organization, just brought us in for a project called Every Defect Matters. So any of their products, the defects in anything that comes up are tracked through the JSM product. ServiceNow, just too expensive and too long to implement, same with our product. Indeed.com, same thing, replacing ServiceNow in one area and another tool in a different area because of that integration, just ease of implementation. And then for credibility purposes, Gartner recognizes us as one of the leaders in the market. So that's my pitch from my side, Laura. Anything else, any questions, let us know, but go ahead. I'll stop sharing here. Can figure out how to do that.
Thanks, Rod. I think that was a really helpful overview for anyone who's new to Atlassian. So with that, let's get into why you're here today. Eric will be talking through what we've built for Cherwell to JSM migration. Again, if you've got questions, feel free to put them into the chat. If they're specific to content we're talking about, I'll try to interrupt Eric as we go with questions. And we'll also keep it open at the end for Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Thanks, Rod. Yeah, so I'm going to do a demo of this migration utility. It's not super exciting, so I've got some super exciting slides to show before it, but I will show you moving some data live. So originally, see if I can advance this. There we go. So I originally wrote this for our consultants to use to migrate customers' data. In the past, when we were moving, we moved a lot of customers originally from like HP Service Manager to Cherwell back in the day when we became a Cherwell partner 12 years ago. And we would usually try to talk customers out of moving data because there just wasn't a great way back then to move the historical data from HP Service Manager to Cherwell. There was just a lot of issues and we didn't really have a toolkit or anything to do it. In the last 12 years, we've run into a lot of customers that need their data moved for a number of reasons, like SOX compliancy. A lot of customers just want to move open tickets, especially the larger customers. They may have hundreds of open tickets that they need to work. And nowadays, especially with the cloud environment, Cherwell, if you're not on premise with Cherwell and you're in the cloud, they're going to turn that off when you stop paying your yearly maintenance and support on that, or your SaaS licensing. So you won't have access to that to do like a swivel chair, from Cherwell to JSM, unless you move it on-prem. So for a lot of customers, they really need the data moved. So I just wrote a little data migration utility just to make the transition easier. So, and like I said, I wrote this for our consultants to use. So it's not too flashy. You'll see when it runs what it looks like, but it really is for us. So instead of taking weeks to move data, we can just do it in hours or days at worst. So the way it works is I wrote a mapping engine, and we use mapping files to map the data from Cherwell to Jira. So data can also be manipulated. So I'm using the Spring framework, and if anybody's familiar with that, but it's just a really nice text manipulation language. So I can merge fields together. You can remove data from fields. So for example, the JSM summary field doesn't take line breaks or carriage returns. So if you're on a newer version of Cherwell, you don't have title anymore. So I'm mapping description, but description can have line breaks in it. So I just removed those. I can show you what that looks like. We can create data maps. So for example, JSM uses different priorities in Cherwell. JSM stores them as, they're stored a couple different ways, but they stored with an ID and a text. And in Cherwell, they were just basically stored as an integer as a string. So we can do some mappings in there. So we can say, hey, if you see a 3 come over from Cherwell, that needs to be a medium. So we can map those. And we also support rich text fields. The rich text, like when you put in screenshots and things in Cherwell, JSM supports that also. So that's especially useful for KP articles. What can we do with this migration utility? Basically, we can map any object in Cherwell to any object in JSM. And we can transform the data as necessary to meet the JSM requirements for data. We can run queries against the Cherwell data. So this mapping file contains a query piece. So what I'm going to show you today, I'm just querying individual records so then I can just run one record. We can update data that's in JSM that's changed in Cherwell. So this really comes in nice for the scenario where you're just moving open tickets over. So we're running this daily or hourly to update the tickets in JSM. So when you do your cutover, all the open tickets will be over there, and we can run it once we do the cutover, and it'll take all the updates from those open tickets. And it'll just probably take a couple minutes to run that updates. We can do rich text field migrations. We can migrate Cherwell supporting objects as part of the main object migration. So we can migrate journals, tasks, and any other one-to-many related records. So if you've got related records, approvals, tasks, journals are the most common, but anything that's out there that's related to the records, we migrate as part of the main record. You'll see that when I run the utility. Migrate of attachments. So you can, if you have just standard attachments, those will get migrated over. And then we can do some complex lookups for supported data matching. So for example, in Cherwell, you could just insert the data with the user's full name for like assignee or customer. In Cherwell, on the object schema editor, you could create rules that would look that user up and copy in the rec ID, say out of customer or the user table. So we essentially do the same thing with our lookup tool. For example, I pass over the customer name or the assignee name to Jira, and Jira's got its own. Of course, it doesn't use the same rec ID that Cherwell uses. It uses its own ID. So we just look that ID up based on the name, for example, and populate that, because Jira doesn't support using name as a populator. We have to use that ID. So we just gave a really easy way to look those up and to populate those. So some of the migration scenarios, moving open tickets to JSM. So this would be the fastest and easiest. So some customers who keep their Cherwell data in an on-prem or cloud database for reporting, in this case, they may need to move their tickets to JSM for their analysts to go to work on after go live. So some Cherwell customers need to move historical data from, say, 3 or 5 or 7 years. So we can move the historical data, and we can look back with a query and just pull historical data that matches a specific time frame. And like I said, the tool makes it pretty easy just to grab the record. So if we're looking back 3 years or a year, we can just grab records that have been, say, closed in the last year or updated in the last year. And some customers may need to move all their historical data. So if say you're a Cherwell customer, you've been on Cherwell 5 years, and you have a compliance requirement that you need to keep all your historical for 7 years, so you need all your data. So we'll just move it all over. And some special considerations. I talked about most of these already, but lookup data, Cherwell or Jira stores those as say the name and the ID, but we have to insert the ID when we create the record. So when we do a lookup based on, say, the full name, which is public ID in Cherwell. So we've built this lookup capability. The data mapping differences. So priority is an example. They're stored as JSM as text values and in Cherwell as integers. So we provide a way to map those. And related records. Cherwell had a lot of related records that may be needed to move over for historical purposes. Journals, tasks, approvals are most. So we can move those all. And one other thing, specifics, the same thing. We treat specifics a little bit differently in the migration utility. But we can treat it one of two ways. We can treat it as part of the main object. So if you have specific fields you want copied into the JSM core fields, we can do that. Or you can treat it as like a lookup object, like a task where you can store it in JSM in like a secondary table. So we can treat it either way, or we can treat some mapped into the tool and some external. So really flexible with that. All right, so let's get into this demo. I'm just going to start with a Cherwell ticket. I've already created this Cherwell ticket. My Cherwell does some crazy things when I create tickets. It always pops me to this last similar incidents tab. So I've created this ticket. It doesn't 103823 is right. Okay, so I'm just going to start this. So this is my mapping tool. We can run it from a DOS prompt. This can actually be scheduled with the task schedule. It can be run on Azure. It can really be run from anywhere. So it runs pretty quick. So here we can see we're querying incidents, and it actually created a Jira ticket number 498. So let's just go look at that quick, that Jira ticket. So I'm just going to look up here for 498. Okay, so this is the ticket that was 498. In Cherwell, I didn't really have I didn't have a lot of information in Cherwell. We can see the assignee came over in the description, all of that, but I didn't have any, go away, message box. I didn't have any comments or any history in here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to here, and I'm just going to add a note. That's all I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a journal note to this ticket. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to save this ticket, and then I'm just going to go back and rerun so the system knows that incident has already been created. It knows I've got it marked in my mapping file to update incidents. So it will update that. And we can see here it created as add Jira comments. And now if I go look at my Jira ticket and I refresh this, I can see I've got my note in there. So same thing if I just go add another note, if I just add that and rerun my export, we'll see it created one. And you can see here it's got a little message that it skipped updating that. So it skipped it. So in the mapping file, every object you can say update or don't update. So notes, we would never update a note unless you're a customer that lets users go back and change notes. So we don't update the notes, we just add new notes. So we can see we skipped that note because it was already there, and we're just adding a new note. So if I go back into Jira and just refresh this, then we'll see two new. All right, so there's my two. All right, so I'm going to go back into Cherwell, and I'm just going to add, come on back, Cherwell. I'm going to add an attachment. So I'm just going to go here, add an attachment right to the ticket. Just do this, save this, and then I'm just going to rerun my import utility. I could have done all this at once, right? I could have created everything in the ticket, but then how am I going to burn the next 20 minutes of this demo? So I'm doing this all piecemeal. Okay, so now we can see it's skipped, and we can see that attachment was saved to Jira issue 12131. So all this is logged. This is actually writing it out to a log. So it knows all the different notes that it's added and every ticket that's been created, etc. So if we go back into here and I just refresh this, there's my attachment. It's coming. It's got a download from, there we go. It's just a picture of a doc. It's not my doc. I don't know where it came from. I'm on a virtual machine on my network. So I must have stuck that there at one point. Okay, so now I'm going to add some tasks. And for whatever reason, in my client, I can't add tasks from here. I broke this or someone broke this. This is my public demo site that we use for our mobile. So I'm just going to pop into my mobile client. I'm going to go here, and of course I'm logged out. And I'm going to log back in. We'll find this record. All right. So I'm going to go back into here, and we can see I don't have any tasks. So I can find the task. I'm just going to add a task. So tasks are interesting in Cherwell because they're not really standard items. They're really like sub objects in Cherwell. They don't have to be, but that's typically how customers treat them. They're always attached to something else. I'm going to add this. Okay, so now I've got that attachment added. And even if I go in here, if I refresh this, we'll see, or not attachment, I'm sorry. I've got this task added. If I go in here, yeah, there's my task. So I've got that task in here. So I'm just going to rerun this migration tool for this one ticket, and we will see it skipping those journal entries. And then it created another, this task, this subtask. And there's a couple of different ways to do tasks in Jira, but I'm just creating it kind of the out of the box, this subtask concept that they've got in here. So here's the task that was in Cherwell, and I've got it as a subtask in here. So of course, if I go in here and I just create another task, and so it is part of the migration, you wouldn't really ever migrate tasks separately. They're always going to be migrated as part of another object in Cherwell, because that's just how Cherwell treated them, was this sub objects. Okay, I'm just going to go back here and I'm going to run my Cherwell export again. And we can see it updated the task and it created a new task. So I've got tasks as an object that it will update. So you can see that task was updated. So if there's any changes, that task will be updated with that change. And then it created the new task. So every object we can say, if it's there, update it, or if it's there, don't update it. So you can decide if you want those updated or not. Typically, you're going to update your task because they're going to be closing, changing status, things like that. Unless we're just doing this as a one shot or it's historical data, then we don't have to update. And the difference is it'll just run a little faster if you're not updating those tasks, because it'll just skip the update. It'll just check to see if it's there. If it's there, it'll leave it alone. If it's there, it will try to update it with the newest data. So if we have that turned off, it'll just run a little bit faster. Okay, so I'm actually going to run over. I'm going to change my configuration file, and I'm going to just show you what doing that to a change looks like. So I'm just going to do that on another screen. I'm going to just change my config file. I've got a change mapping already done. Okay, I've got that config file up. I'm just going to map. I've got a change number called 10819. And I don't have all the fields mapped in here. I honestly did this like an hour before this, and I thought maybe incident wouldn't be enough. So let's go find this in share 10892. Okay, we can see this change. It's got a lot of tasks basically, and a lot of journal entries. I also got a couple. Okay, so let's rerun this. I've got my mapping file changed to change. This is what the mapping file looks like. We can see here, this is the field ID number, and we've got it equals 10892, right? So then I've got my mappings down here, mapping impacts and urgencies and all these different things. So let's rerun this. So I'm just going to rerun the same thing. I just changed my mapping file that I'm passing in here. Hopefully we don't get any errors. Okay, so now it's going through, it created the change, and now it's created the couple journal entries, the comments, and now it's creating all the subtasks. So this one's got 21 subtasks. We'll have to wait to see. And from what I've seen, it takes about a second to half a second. So you can do the math on how long this is going to take to run in your environment. If you figure about 1 second per record. So if you've got 100,000 records, you can do the math on that, see how long all these are going to take to be created. But okay, so I can see it created a change EK 501. So let's just go look at 501. All right, install new software. So this is what it looks like. So this is the change record that was created over from Cherwell. And you can see I've got a lot of these that aren't filled out, but pretty simple exercise to map all these things in. Here's all the tasks that were created with that, and then some comments that were in there. And you can choose, like for comments, I'm copying everything into here. You could just do notes, you can do comments, you could do everything that you want. So it's just all based on the relationship. So for you Cherwell admins out there, I'm just copying in the relationship ID is what we're using here to copy in that. So I'm also copying in approvals into there too. So let's take a look at that one too. So I've got another change that's got some historical approvals. So I'm just going to change my mapping file to point to that change record, 10905. And let's take a look at that in share. Okay, so this one, it doesn't have any tasks. I don't believe it's got any current approvals, but it has some approval history. So let's take a look and see what we'll map. Make sure this is saved here. Let's map this change in. All right, so there it's putting a bunch of comments in. So I assume we've probably got a bunch of journal entries in here. Yes, we do. So we've got journal entries, and then we've got approval history. So let's see, is this done? Yep, that one's done. Okay, so that created 523. So let's go look at 523, replace CAD program. And you can see here's the approval information. I just stuck everything together in a string, right? So I put the status, who the approver was, and then the details of the approver. So, but you can really pull anything out that you want. And it wouldn't have to go here. It could go in approvals. I just stuck it in comments because I was already working with comments and some other stuff. But it could go in the historical approvals tab also. I just didn't have time to set that up. So that's a change. I also want to show you, let me see if I've got, this might be in a separate, I migrated some knowledge base articles over. I can't remember if it's in this project or, yeah, here we go. Believe I've got some with some, here we go. So this is add a barcode field knowledge article that's in Cherwell, and it looks pretty much like it does in Cherwell. So I just migrated the knowledge articles, and this is the HTML in the, what is it called? Detail, or I can't remember the name of the field in Cherwell, but it copies that over. So, and this is Jira's knowledge article system. So we can copy that right in from Cherwell too. And you can do the same thing with description. I don't have that set up, the HTML field set up in incident or change, but we basically just tell the system what the HTML fields are. And if you're familiar with Cherwell's API, you'll know that Cherwell actually stores the data in HTML format and non-HTML format. So if we tell our migration tool what the HTML fields are, it will go and pull the HTML data out of Cherwell instead of the non-HTML data and stick that in the field. So when we're mapping, we just have to make sure that's supported in Jira. So for example, if I go back here and look at an incident, HTML fields would only be supported in like in the description and not up here in the summary. So and that's just, and you can see the difference, right? So what the description's got, all this markup that you can do, and the summary does not. So it's pretty easy to tell in Jira if that is supported or not. And of course, you can always, if you've got a text field that you want to store HTML data in from Cherwell, you can convert that text field into a HTML field. So, okay. So Laura, that's about all I have for a demo. Hopefully we have some questions to answer to fill the rest of this time.
So far, we've got a couple from one of our customers. Okay. And if you've got questions, anyone else on the line, please start entering them now. The first one we have is, this customer has built 2 custom tools on CSM that are not ticketing systems. How does the conversion tool handle custom applications?
As long as there's a Cherwell object behind it, it doesn't really matter, because when we do the mapping, we just name the object right here. So this is the mapping file. So if your application uses a Cherwell object behind the scenes to store the data, we just reference that here. It doesn't have to be out of the box. We just give it the name, and then we look up the rec ID for that. And then down in here in the fields, we have access to all the fields that are in that object. So for example, impact is in Cherwell, and urgency is in Cherwell, and description is in Cherwell. Once we name what that object is, this tool knows what all the fields in there are. So and then we just map that to a field in the Jira object. So whatever field is in that Jira object, we map that. So issue. So if we're mapping to assets, we can put that asset's name in there. So that's the Jira object we're mapping to. So yeah, it doesn't matter if it's out of the box. It doesn't matter really what it is. If it's in Cherwell, and as long as it's in Cherwell, and you can publish a blueprint for it, we can get to it because the API uses information that's in the blueprint basically to get the information out, to get all the fields out, and then we can map that to something in Jira. If Jira doesn't have that type of functionality out of the box, it might be something you need to add, or something that's out on the marketplace, or maybe Jira is already doing it. But it doesn't really matter if it's custom object in Cherwell or out of the box object. We just map it in this mapping document.
Okay, thank you. The next one is related. How does the conversion tool handle one-steps and automation or scheduling elements?
So there is no, unfortunately, and I've been asked that by a lot of customers, Cherwell doesn't expose any of that information via the API. So there's no real good way to get it. Jira does. So if Cherwell did expose it, we could probably do something with it, because Jira does expose. So you can write macros and workflows and everything through the API. So as far as one steps, Cherwell just doesn't give a way to interrogate what that one step does. So there really is no great way to write a workflow a migration tool from Cherwell to Jira. And it's just because Cherwell doesn't expose that. And I think Avanti ran into the same issue. They had promised for a long time that one steps were going to be migrated, and they never did it. They just couldn't do it. The tools are just too dissimilar, right? And same thing with Cherwell. And Cherwell had a very unique way of doing things, just doesn't map well to a lot of other tools. So I'd love to tackle it if Cherwell exposed that information so you could get to it via the API. Because like I said, you can do all sorts of stuff with Jira's API. You can write all your rules via API if you want. But yeah, Cherwell just doesn't expose it. So there's really no way to migrate one steps, et cetera.
Okay. The next one is a comment. This person would be interested in your perspective on migrating end user portal offerings and workflows.
So yeah, if you've got a lot of portal items, like hundreds and hundreds of catalog items, those we could use the tool to migrate those items into Jira, because it's similar, right? How Cherwell and Jira store the items that are going to be put into the catalog. But unfortunately, there's no way to migrate the workflow. And once again, it's just because Cherwell doesn't expose that workflow to any sort of API, or there's really no way to export that workflow and get it into a form where you can recreate it in another system. It's just one of those things when you migrate from one tool to another, you just end up having to recreate that workflow in the new tool. And that's just the root of it. I could see if Cherwell did something, if your workflow revolved around task creation, we could maybe do something with that, create the same type of task workflow. But it's difficult because Cherwell just doesn't expose that. So how do we get that information out of Cherwell so we can recreate it in Jira? It's just a difficult proposition. It's probably just easier to recreate the workflow, honestly.
Okay, thank you. The next question I have is, can you touch on the features around comparable Kanban and custom views? Can and will that be migrated?
Yeah, so Jira's got Kanban boards throughout the product. And of course, custom views are just native to the Jira project. So I think if you're one of our Kanban board users, we don't even have Kanban boards for JSM because JSM supports those. Everything that we did with Kanban boards, JSM can do. And in fact, when I built those Kanban boards, Jira was what I used for a template to build those. So the functionality around our Kanban boards is modeled after how the Jira Kanban boards work. Yeah, custom views, anything that's custom view that you have in Jira, you can just recreate that in JSM. So you can have as many custom views as you want.
Okay, thank you. I read the next one here. Can the relationship/linking from incidents to knowledge articles be maintained during the conversion?
Yeah, anything that's linked in Cherwell that also has a link in Jira, we can maintain. So now the trick, well, and there's a couple different ways to do it, right? You can store a value. So if you store a KB article in the incident, then we just move that KB article name over and give it the name of the new KB article. The best case is if you've got a relationship in Cherwell, because then we can use that relationship to actually create that knowledge base article on the fly. So we can actually create the knowledge base articles as they're related to the incident, or we can just store the relationship in Jira. So if you've got a relationship in Cherwell and there is a corresponding relationship in JSM, we can do that. And as far as knowledge base and incidents, or really knowledge base in any items, there is in JSM. So as long as you've got either that knowledge base article stored as a field or preferably as a relationship, so they're a related item in Cherwell, then we can just move that over.
Okay, thank you. So from the same person related, can the knowledge article derivative data, such as likes and usage count, carry across?
I don't know 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure because that stuff's just stored at the knowledge level. So if you're storing that knowledge information in the knowledge base in Cherwell, JSM has similar information. So when we create that knowledge article, we would just populate that data in JSM. So as long as we have access to it in the Cherwell API, and I'm not super familiar with that extraneous information on knowledge where it's stored, I'm assuming it's just stored as fields in the Cherwell record, or as a related record. So either one, as long as we can see it and get to it, and it's not stored externally, like on like Google, what is it, Google Analytics or whatever they call it. As long as it's not stored there and we can get to it, we can put it into JSM.
All right. Thank you. Next one. How does the migration handle email monitors and email notifications?
So we can't migrate the email monitor information over because once again, Cherwell doesn't expose that information to any way that we can get to it and see what it does. Notifications. Oh, I don't think Cherwell exposes the notification object either. When you create those notifications, I don't think there's a way to get at those. I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure there's not. Unfortunately, if there was, we could, because Jira exposes pretty much anything you do in Jira in the admin side, you can do with an API call. So, if we could get that information out of Jira, we could reproduce it in Jira with an API call. But I just don't. I know for sure the email monitor rules just not accessible. We just can't get to them. We can't do anything with them. The actual notification records, I'm pretty sure we can't get to them. You could potentially do expose, if we could figure out the trebuchet table those are stored in, we could potentially expose those to the API, maybe figure it out. But once again, unless you've got thousands of them, it's probably not even worth automating. It's probably just better to recreate them manually.
Okay. And one of our clients, who I know is a sharp guy, chipped in and said no because it's in the one step. So that. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you, Jason. All right. Next question. You can export a one-step definition, but this is a comment. I think you can export a one-step definition, but I imagine that would be a nightmare to parse and rebuild in another system.
Yeah, you can get the XML out of a one-step. I just don't think it's worth building a tool to try to figure out. Vanti spent like a year and a half on it and couldn't figure it out. So it's probably not worth doing for a migration. It'd be cool, but I don't want to spend the next year trying to figure out how one-steps work and relate them to JSM macros and things like that.
The next is 3 questions I'm going to roll together from the same person. Does Jira have a custom join table mechanism like Cherwell? Are those one-to-many relationship models supported, like service catalog template work items?
Yeah.
If that was hard to follow, feel free to pull up the chat.
Yeah, I mean, as far as functionality goes, but between relationships between objects, JSM is very similar to how Cherwell works. So, they both have their origins from the same like database structure. Basically, Jira used to run on SQL Server, Oracle, and Cherwell runs on SQL Server. So they both did the same relational database concepts when they're built. Yeah, so of course you can build one-to-many relationships in Jira, just like you can in Cherwell, and have the different object types. So they work very similar. So I think if you look at these, and any tool that you're building functionality on, which Cherwell and them both are, that they're essentially applications built on top of a tool set. These tool sets under the covers all work very similarly, right? They have objects and related objects and one-to-many relationships and one-to-one relationships and fields and all that sort of thing. So they're very similar under the covers.
Currently, we have 2 questions left in the queue. So if you have any questions, now is a really good time to enter those, because if we don't have any, after the next 2 answers, we'll be wrapping up our webinar. Ask those now if you've got them. This next question, I believe, is a follow-up on the topic we just addressed. Does Jira have an email monitor or some other way to automate ticket creation from an email?
Yes. They have an email monitor that can create tickets. Yep.
Okay. Short and sweet. All right.
Yep.
So that will bring us to our final question so far. Last call for additional questions. Does the conversion tool include forms too?
No. Once again, there's absolutely no way to get that form data out of Cherwell. I wish there was, because it would have made, making our Kanban boards and native mobile design simpler, where we didn't have to redesign all those forms in mobile and Kanban. But there's just no way to get the forms out. Of course, there is in Jira. You can add fields to a form. You can see the form layout with API calls. You can do all that in Jira, but without the data from Cherwell, it's difficult. So Cherwell they never open that stuff up any way to pull that information out.
Okay, thanks. We did get one final question that popped up, but Eric, could you pull up our slide deck with the contact information?
Oh, sure.
If
Yep.
anyone thinks of follow-on questions or would like to have a one-on-one discussion, feel free to reach out to us. My contact information is here. So again, one final call for questions. The last one we have here is, does contracting with StrataCom include licensing and usage of this tool? And can we write our own maps like you've shown here?
Yeah. If like I said earlier, I wrote this for our consultants to migrate our customers from Cherwell to JSM. So it would just, if you end up working with us to do that migration, there is no like tool licensing piece of it. It's just an item on the statement of work data migration, and it'll be some hours. But if you want to do it yourself and don't want to involve us, we can license this tool to you, and you can pay us to use it, where you would own the tool, and then you can write as many migration mapping files as you want, and you could run it yourself, and you would be in charge of it. So we will sell you the tool. So let's say you're using another partner, or you just want to do it yourself because you've got some wizards on staff that are just going to do your migration. You can buy the tool from us and use that. So if data migration is a big point in your organization, it's probably worth the money, because to rewrite this, keep in mind, we wrote the Kanban and mobile client. So we had all these Cherwell libraries available. So when we wrote this migration tool, we just plugged in all those libraries we already had that handles things like the tokens running out. What do we do if a token runs out when we use a refresh token? So all that's written into our libraries already. And we spent years developing that mobile client and those Kanban boards. And so all the things with the related records and to create those, and we already had all those libraries written. We just had to reuse them for this migration tool. So it came in handy. So if you were going to write something this yourself, you could probably do it. It would just take some time, right? So it might be cheaper just to buy it from us and let the tool do its work. But yeah, originally we had this plan to use with our consultants just to make it's simpler to migrate the data. So we didn't have to spend weeks migrating data, cleaning CSV files, whatever we used to have to do to try to migrate data from system to system. Now we have a ticket number. Now we have to store the old ticket number from Share, because we need to use that as a reference for all the journals and tasks that we're going to create. We just avoid all of that because we're creating the tasks right when we create the instance. So we don't have to store the Cherwell ticket number. We can still store the Cherwell ticket number for reference if you want. But yeah, I appreciate that question. You can purchase this from it, and we'll give you some training on how to use it and help you out. But primarily meant for our migrating our customers.
Okay, yeah, that was a good question, because that's always the next piece that people want to know is, how much does it cost? And really, on our proposals, it's just an internal team tool our team uses, like Eric said, and you'll see it as a line item in the statement of work, but really it represents a cost reduction, because typically a migration line item would be a lot more, but since we have this tool, the professional services line item is going to be less. So it's like a cost reduction. We use StrataCom, which is nice. Okay, we have one other question that came in. I'm not sure if you'll be able to address it, Eric, but it's a licensing question. How does it work if we already use Ops Genie?
That is a good question, Rod. I know.
Yep. Ops
Yeah, go
Genie
ahead,
would
Rod.
just, your licensing and contracting for Ops Genie would go away. You just license a JSM tool. Simple as that. And so any cost, you could roll it into offset your cost for JSM. In some cases, it might be a match 1-for-1. It depends upon what kind of contracting you have. Laura, you can provide them a quote if needed, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you are interested in migrating to GSM, we'd be happy to provide you with licensing. The nice thing is you can either buy through the website at full price, or you can come through a partner and get a little bit of discounting. So there's actually a cost benefit to using a partner, which is not necessarily already the case. And good question too, because if you are interested in Ops Genie, it comes with JSM. If you're using PagerDuty, you could stop using that and save all the money if you'd like, and get Ops Genie for free instead. Great question.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think, and Rod touched on it earlier, but all the things that are included with JSM, Ops Genie, Discovery, they have a lot of tools in the ITSM world that you have to pay for from a lot of vendors separately that are included with JSM. I was talking to a customer yesterday, and they couldn't believe that they can get Discovery and Ops Genie with their JSM license. And like you said, Laura, there's PagerDuty and there's some other notification tools out there that you can just replace with Ops Genie, and it's just included.
Oh yeah, Eric, I had one yesterday with MoveWorks. If you're familiar with that tool, AI tool, I just had a customer last week say they can replace MoveWorks with JSM because the AI powered virtual agent that we have built into the product. So
Yeah, and the Teams, I was demoing the Teams because we had a Teams client for Cherwell that we wrote. And I was demoing the Teams client for another customer in Jira. And it has so much more functionality than our Cherwell Teams client has. You can literally work in Teams all day long on JSM tickets, and it's just like you're in JSM. It's pretty crazy.
Okay. At this point, I don't see any additional questions, and we're nearly at the top of the hour. So I believe that'll conclude our webinar for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Again, if you'd like to explore a migration to JSM, we'd love to hook you up with a demo of JSM, provide you pricing, and scope a implementation effort. If that's something you're interested in the coming year, please reach out at any time. Again, we did record today's session, so you'll see that recording sometime in the next week after we get a chance to upload it. Reach out anytime. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Have a great day,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.